Read aloud time, and you guessed it, I picked another George and Martha book. I hope you enjoyed the last one. So this one's called George and Martha, One Fine Day. If you look closely at this book, I don't know, it doesn't look that great. It looks kind of old and kind of, not very appealing, which means like, oh, I'd want to pick it. But you know what? Once you hear the story, you're going to love it, I think. And that just tells me I can't ever just say, oh, I'm not going to like that book by just looking at the cover. I need to kind of read it or maybe get some recommendations from my friends or my teacher. So I hope you enjoy it. George and Martha, One Fine Day. Again, these will be a few short stories in here. This is by James Marshall. 5 stories about 2 best friends. Story number 1, The Tightrope. One morning when George looked out his window, he could scarcely believe his eyes. Martha was walking a tightrope. My stars, cried George. I could never do that. Why not, said Martha. It's tons of fun. I like when he said he could scarcely believe his eyes. Like he could barely believe his eyes. But it's so high up, said George. Yes, said Martha. And it's such a long way down, said George. That's very true, said Martha. It would be quite a fall, said George. I see what you mean, said Martha. Suddenly, Martha felt uncomfortable. For some reason, she had lost all of her confidence. She began to wobble. George realized his mistake. Now he had to do some fast talking. Of course, he said, anyone can see you love walking the tightrope. Oh, yes, said Martha. Certainly, said George. And if you love what you do, you'll be very good at it too. Martha's confidence was restored. That means she became more confident. I love those words he uses. Watch this, she said. Martha did some fancy footwork on the tightrope. Oh, George is being a good friend now. Story number 2, The Diary. Whenever Martha sat down to write in her diary, George was always nearby. Yes, George, said Martha. I was just on my way to the kitchen, said George. Said Martha. I don't believe him. Martha decided to finish writing outdoors. How peculiar. That's a fun word. I mean, strange. How peculiar, she said to herself. I can still smell George's cologne. Then Martha heard leaves rustling above her. You betcha, George is still spying. Ah, she cried. You were spying on me. I wanted to see what you were writing in your diary, said George. Then you should have asked my permission, said Martha. May I peek in your diary? George asked politely. No, said Martha. Story number 3, The Icky Story. At lunch, George started to tell an icky story. Martha strongly objected. That means she didn't want to hear it. Please, have some consideration, she said, but George told his icky story nevertheless. You're asking for it, said Martha. When Martha finished her lunch, she told an icky story. It was so icky that George felt all queasy inside. He couldn't even eat his dessert. You're the champ, said George. Don't make me do it again, said Martha. I won't, said George. Story number 4, The Big Scare. Boo! Cried George. Have mercy, screamed Martha. Martha and her stamp collection went flying. I'm sorry, said George. I was feeling wicked. Well, said Martha, now it's my turn. Go ahead, said George. Not right away, Martha said slyly. Suddenly, George found it was very difficult to concentrate on what he was doing. Any minute now, Martha is going to scare the pants off of me, he said to himself. He's waiting for it. Maybe she's hiding someplace, he said. George made sure that Martha wasn't hiding under the sink. During the day, George got more and more nervous. Any minute now, he said. But Martha was relaxing in her hammock. I'm sorry, I forgot to scare you, said Martha. That's all right, said George. It wouldn't have worked anyway. I'm not easily frightened. I know, said Martha. The last story. The amusement park. That evening, George and Martha went to the amusement park. They rode the Ferris wheel. They rode the roller coaster. They rode the bump cars. They were having a wonderful time. But in the tunnel of love, Martha sat very quiet. It was very dark in there. Suddenly, Martha cried, "Boo! Have mercy!" screamed George. I didn't forget after all, said Martha. So I see, said George. That story makes me laugh just because when you're a friend, you really shouldn't be getting back at each other. But these friends, they are just like us. They make mistakes too. So they kind of make me laugh. And in the end, you know that they still care about each other and they still can forgive each other even when they make mistakes, just like we need to. So I love these stories and I hope you did too. Remember, go ahead and click on that slide below if you wanted to hear any of those stories. Have a wonderful day.